And the tours that I've actually taken, the big bus, or sometimes I eavesdrop in the park, see, remarkably well informed, but also I can see that you interact with people, and people are come back with stuff. My great great grandfather fought in the Civil War. I had an ancestor who fought the Revolutionary War. You're the ones who like fire up the 9-year-olds and get them interested in, in lifelong pursuits of this kind of thing. So I think you're like the most emotionally in touch with our history, and you bring it into today. So you're a little scary. I hope I'm not going to be telling you too much stuff that you already know. I hope I'll be able to give you some factoids that you can use on tours. And when we're done, I'll be happy to tackle any questions that you have. But so, yes, I am actually a filmmaker. And when we went into lockdown for COVID, I got an extraordinary offer to write a book. And I'm still surprised to find that I wrote a book. But it was a heck of an experience. And I have to say, filmmaking is more fun. You get to work with other humans. You write a book, you're locked up with yourself. But anyway, it let me really dig deeper. I had spent years in doing primary source research. Hello. We're just starting. It's okay. But so this story, I think, I hope I don't disappoint the blood and gore crowd, because you can find, there's plenty of stuff on the internet, but what the story that came to me was a story of incredible, compassionate heroism on the part of Americans, Black, white, men, women, Northern, Southern, in the face of incredible, hideous violence and seemingly unending horror. These people who worked in the medical aspect of the Civil War were just amazing heroes. And oh, I have to I'm sorry, I have allergies too going on here. But the story is really very intrinsic to our city. It's a very Philadelphia-based story. Philadelphia, people always ask me how I found the story of Civil War medicine. And my mom was a journalist and columnist in Philadelphia. You're probably too young to remember. Her name was Rose DeWolf. Oh, okay. Oh, and she was passionate about this city. And one night we were going to dinner. I was very happily working on a documentary about the science of music. And my mom told me, we were driving around Logan Circle, and she said, Philadelphia has more Civil War statuary than any city in the country. And I thought, oh, really? And the next day I was thinking, why? There were no battles here. They didn't make guns here. I knew there were textile factories and they made uniforms, but I don't understand, like, why would we have more than 30 monuments and statues? The number is a little like flexible, but there are around 36 various Civil War monuments in the city. So today I really want to share with you some of the incredible people, their actions, and how this played out, and why Philadelphia played such a major role. So I also wanted to mention, if anybody knows, before my mom died, I forgot to ask her where she learned this about how much statuary there is. And she told me, and I actually spoke with this person, Ginger Osborne, who worked for the Fairmount Park Commission. I was talking to her about the statues, and I told her what my mom, and she said, I told your mother that story. So I was like, oh, so I would love to, I track her down again. But so let's just start with a sculpture, and I'm gonna show you a few of my favorites, just for visual thrills, and a reminder of how much effort went into memorializing this terrible conflict in this city. So we can talk Civil War medicine in Philadelphia. I went to Moore College, And I saw these pylons on the parkway every day for years and never realized that they were Civil War monuments. They are the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial. They're gorgeous up close. This is the sailors. I always thought they looked so contemporary to me. And it wasn't until I worked on this project and I thought, oh my gosh, I never realized. But I'll just show a few of my favorites. I'm very fond of the equestrian statues. So, at City Hall, General George McClellan, and also City Hall is General John Reynolds. I just think these horses are gorgeous. And then one of my faves, General Galusha Pennypacker, in front of the library. He's by Logan Circle, the library and family court. So he was the youngest general in the Union Army, 22 years old. And he is depicted in a very heroic way, probably rival. Yeah, really. I think the only thing that could rival the macho is the Rocky statue, probably. But he is depicted in the Beaux-Arts tradition. It's kind of Romanesque, with the snarling tigers and the gun carriage, and so he's Galusha is very gallant. And this is the oldest of the regiments, the Washington Grays Monument in front of the Union League on Broad Street. Now, this was formed in 1822. And these guys fought in the Civil War. So we do have our own Abraham Lincoln Monument and Kelly Drive. And so I wondered, like, all these memorials, and it's really memorializing the fact that Philadelphia was a center of medicine at the time of the Civil War for the entire country. Most of the doctors, North and South, went to school here at Penn or Jefferson. The two largest military hospitals in the North were here. We'll take a look at them. And so Civil War medicine is a very, very Philadelphia thing. Well, I like to start. Let's take a look at the enemy. The death toll of the American Civil War was 1 million casualties. That is more than the American casualties in World War I, II, and Vietnam combined. We only exceeded that total with Afghanistan. So these are the two things causing most of the medical damage. Let's just, I'm going to give you a 5-minute crash course through the weapons, because let's look at where, what were they fighting with these doctors and medical volunteers? What were they fighting against? What caused it? So I like to start with the genesis of things. I wondered, where does gunpowder come from? Well, gunpowder comes from the 10th century in China, when a group of Taoist monks were trying to create a medication, get ready, to extend human life. So they mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. And it did not, as we know, extend human life. It was, however, not only explosive, but it was a propellant. So I think that fired up the neurons for the next several centuries in weapon creation. And so what they first did with it, it inspired fire lances. So you took some of this powder, you wrapped it in paper or fabric, strapped it to an arrow with a fuse, lit the fuse, fired away. All right. And it all developed from there. So, okay, I'm going to rush you forward 8 or 9 centuries, but at the beginning of the Civil War, the gunpowder is being used in these weapons. So the most popular single weapon in 1861 was the Springfield Model 1861 musket. The term musket, there are varying opinions, but the one I found most believable, that most guns were named after animals. And the French for sparrowhawk is mousquet. So we think that is very likely where it came from. Now, this gun was what's known as a smooth bore rifle. So you'll hear rifle, long gun, shoulder gun are all interchangeable terms. So this fired a round ammunition like a fat marble, usually made out of poured lead, sometimes made of stone. It was wrapped in a piece of fabric, which was to keep it from bouncing off the walls and interfering with the trajectory on its way out of the gun barrel. And then you jammed it down there with a long, slim tool called a ramrod. So this musket could fire reliably 1 round a minute. If you were really good, you might be able to do 2. It's said that there were guys who could do 3 rounds a minute. Well, this is, okay, in the middle, you see a musket ball. And on either side, despite their bullet shape, these are called mini balls. This was a brand new ammunition that was invented in France by a French army officer named Carole Adrienne. So it became the mini ball. Now, the intensely important thing about these, you see the grooves in the bottom of those projectiles. They began to cut grooves on the inside of the rifle barrels. So these locked in, that kept the trajectory more accurate. It was faster, it was cleaner. It really improved, unfortunately, the killing power of the weapons. What's that? Yes. And just like a football does, and what that kind of, so now these are the first repeating rifles. There was a brilliant young man in Connecticut named Spencer, and he, Christopher Minor Spencer, and he worked for a long time. A lot of people had tried to develop a reliable repeating rifle, and Spencer managed to do that. He was a very bright and creative inventor, and he actually had created a lot of machinery for textile mills in Connecticut. But when he got this gun right, he knew he was there. And so he wanted to show it to President Lincoln. So he took his gun, he got on the train, came from to Washington, and took it to the White House to show the president, as one does. And and when Lincoln saw this, I say this with admiration and respect, but it seems that President Lincoln was a major techno geek. He loved anything mechanical. They said he devoured Scientific American magazine, the New York Times, anything having to do with new and advancing technology. He was all over it. His friends said that when they stopped at a farm overnight, he would go look at the farm equipment. He would crawl under it. He would sight it. He was just really very knowledgeable, and he was fascinated. So when he saw this repeating rifle, he had to shoot it. And even though the law in Washington, D.C. at the time was that no guns could be fired inside the city limits. So the impression I have of Lincoln at that point was kind of like, and he grabbed a naval aide and Christopher Spencer. They knocked up a crude pine target and took it to a park across the street from the White House. And Lincoln got to fire this thing. He loved it. And he recommended it to the Army and the Navy, who both tested it, loved it, and thousands of Spencer repeating rifles were delivered to Union soldiers over the next couple of years. Now, what I'm talking about here with the advances in weapons, this is within about a 2.5-year period. This is not over decades. We went from 1 round a minute. Now we've got 20 rounds a minute. So the face of battle is changing pretty seriously. Then we get the Gatling gun. The Gatling gun opens the lane to the way of assault rifles. This is the great granddaddy. The Gatling gun was 6 separate rifle barrels attached to a metal cylinder that was cranked by hand. And as you can see, this thing was pretty easy to move around, to aim. I mean, it was heavy, but it was not like cannon heavy. This gun could fire 200 rounds a minute. So we went within the space of 2.5 years, 1 round a minute to 20 rounds a minute to 200 rounds a minute. The other extraordinary thing about the Gatling gun was that it was invented by a medical doctor. This is Richard Jordan Gatling, another brilliant young inventor who created a lot of equipment for agriculture. His specialty was kind of like things that made planting easier and more, yes, exactly that, because we're efficient. Now he was on a business trip. He was 28 and he caught smallpox. He was one of the lucky ones who survived intact. And when he recovered, he decided he wanted to go to medical school. So he attended medical school in Ohio, earned his MD degree, but he decided he still really wanted to be an inventor. Well, when the soldiers began to return from the war, broken or dead, sick, it was horrible. He was horrified and moved by all of that. And that's when he invented the Gatling gun. And the explanation for it, I thought, was pretty moving. He wrote to a friend about why he had invented the most terrible weapon available. He said, "It occurred to me that if I could invent a machine, a gun, which could, by rapidity of fire, enable one man to do as much battle duty as 100, that it would, to a great extent, supersede the necessity of large armies, and consequently exposure to battle and disease be greatly diminished." He thought he was going to end war with it. So, yeah, it's sad story. Well, the other thing that they were fighting against were diseases. Now, all of these diseases you see listed were very common at the time of the Civil War. However, the only one for which inoculation was available was smallpox. And that inoculation had been available really for centuries in Africa. And I tell this if you're reading my book, the story is in the introduction, which is that a man stolen from Africa and given as a gift to Cotton Mather of Salem witch trial fame, who renamed him Onesimus. And Onesimus described the process in Africa for immunization from smallpox. They made a cut in the skin, and then they used pus or scab material from someone who had a full-blown case of smallpox, rubbed it into that open wound, and most of the time it made them immune to smallpox. So, but everything else, well, what did they have to deal with it? Let's take a look, because it's pretty limited. The two hot drugs, really, the hottest, were quinine and opium. Now, quinine had been in use really in South America for a couple hundred years. It's made from the bark of the cinchona tree, and it came to this continent, we think, with Jesuit priests who brought it, because sometimes you hear it called Jesuit's bark or Cardinal's bark, and they ground it up, they put it in wine, they did various things, but it in fact, quinine was used into this 21st century in other countries to cure malaria. They have synthesized it, and so it's not usually the same thing, but they used it for everything, and they used it on men, they used it on horses. So quinine was really valued. It was what the South missed the most and spent an awful lot of time trying to synthesize when the naval blockade stopped them from getting it from the North. The other big drug was opium. Obviously, the painkiller, it was given for diarrhea, for constipation, it was given for all kinds of ailments. And it created, with all the injuries and sicknesses, that an awful lot of people became addicted to it as a painkiller during the war. They called it old soldier's disease. Unfortunately, we do not have numbers how many people died of that addiction in soldiers' homes after the war, but it was, and everything I've seen about commercially available over-the-counter drugs at the time of the Civil War, everything had opium in it. It was just like, you know, yes, run down to CVS for some opium, right? Well, mercury was another biggie. A lot of people died. Louisa May Alcott, the author, died from mercury poisoning, and it's thought that Lincoln did have it from the blue mass pills he was taking, but he stopped them and apparently recovered. So they did have anesthesia. There is an awful lot of mythology about biting on bullets or getting drunk on alcohol before surgery, but the records and statistics show us that almost every surgery performed during the Civil War was performed with the use of anesthesia. It gave them a 9-minute window to do an amputation, the single most common surgery during the Civil War. And amazingly, even though almost everybody who had surgery suffered horrible infections afterward, but 75% of those amputees survived. So whether that's the skill of the doctors or the spirit of the soldiers, we don't know, but they did make it. So, well, that's what they had. Then they had 1 million casualties. It was just earth-shaking. One of the first big battles in the North, in Manassas, Georgia, first Bull Run. At the end of that battle, there were 500 wounded laying on that field. There was no such thing as ambulance service in America. There was no, rescue, nothing. And so a lot of those guys lay on that field for days, up to a week. If you were able to get yourself crawling onto the road and manage to get a ride to a town or city for help, it was horrible. And really all the generals, the doctors, everybody was pretty horrified by what happened at Bull Run. And they made every effort not to repeat that. So I want to talk a little bit about what they knew. What was the state of medical education at that point? The archivist for Thomas Jefferson University, Michael Angelo, said something to me that just, I've never forgot, rang in my head. He said that the medicine of 1860 was almost identical to the medicine of 1760. It was considered an art, not a science. It had not advanced at all, basically. But we did have in Philadelphia, a very sophisticated city, we had some medical schools. Now, before 1765, there were medical schools in the country and in Europe, and they were independent. This is the first one, University of Pennsylvania, where a medical school is attached to a university, which now is like so common, but that was the first instance of it. So here is the 4th Street campus in 1765, and you can see it's definitely grown by the 19th century. Now, the courses were not given in the way we think of in a curriculum today in medical school. What you did was, if you got accepted, well, the medical education in Europe was pretty reliably 4 years. In America, it was 2 years. So you signed up for lectures and you basically repeated the same lectures the second year. Then you went before a board who decided whether to confer an MD degree upon you or not. I love, I always used to think of the Civil War in black and white. And there are so many, like, these things are such gorgeous colors. I have to thank the Library Company of Philadelphia, Drexel Archives, Thomas Jefferson University Archives. These images come from about 40 different institutions who've been very generous with them. These are matriculation certificates for Penn. And then we get Jefferson Medical College, and Jefferson appears later than University of Pennsylvania. In 1825, they open what really is called the Infirmary of Jefferson Medical College, and it evolves into the hospital of Jefferson Medical College. Here's an old 1858 album from Jefferson. But Jefferson gives us one of the first big superstars of Civil War medicine, Dr. Samuel David Gross. Now, he grew up in Lancaster County. He spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. He didn't learn classical English till he was a teenager. He knew from apparently early cognition that he wanted to be a doctor. So he needed that language. Well, he became not just a physician, but a surgeon, a professor, an author. He really trained generations of young doctors. And you probably recognize him as well from the painting, The Gross Clinic. This is just a little bit of that painting, which is wall-sized. It resides at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's really quite something. They're removing a tumor from an anesthetized patient. So, but Samuel Gross also wrote some really important books and pamphlets, which pretty much educated the surgeons of Civil War medicine. When the Civil War started, there were possibly as many as 300 doctors in the entire country, not just Philadelphia, 300 doctors all over America who had even witnessed surgery or seen a gunshot wound in a human. So this is brand new territory for these guys. Now, a copy of Dr. Gross's book found its way into the South and was reprinted there. So a lot of Confederate surgeons really learned. There are descriptions in some of the first person accounts that I've read where they're basically somebody's holding a candle or a torch. The doctor's got the book in one hand and a knife in the other. I mean, it was pretty basic. So, but we had something else really wonderful in Philadelphia, the Female Medical College. There was another female medical college in New England, but the Philadelphia one awarded an MD degree before the New England one. So there's a little bit of rivalry there, but yeah, we had it first. But 1850 was their first commencement class. Now, this became the records, it was taken over by Hahnemann and then absorbed into Drexel's Legacy Center. So these records are still extant and quite impressive. This was a time when women doctors who really were not believed in, but they were called doctress. They were not called doctor. It was a long time before they got to be doctor. Well, at the start, so we got thousands of wounded guys laying on fields really up and down the East Coast, and very few major hospitals at this point. A lot of hospitals really were infirmaries that had kind of, morphed into larger facilities. So basically, when it started and they started to set up these tent city hospitals, very common, because they also began to extemporize public and private buildings. The U.S. Capitol, the Rotunda, served as a hospital for several months in 1862. What? Oh, the church. Yes, it is. Oh, no, this is Northern Virginia, I think. I'm pretty sure it was Northern Virginia. Well, you could be right, though. I'm not, I don't have notes with me. But what they would do with the churches was, because what would happen is they would say to these young doctors, you take the 8th Street Church and this church and have them ready as a hospital for 100 guys in 5 days. And some of these guys wrote descriptions that I didn't know where to get salts and peppers, let alone beds and sheets. And they asked and they worked and they made it happen. So with the churches, they found the most expedient way to handle it was to put planks over the pews. So they basically built another floor. Then they moved in the beds, and as soon as they moved them in, they filled them. Now, Philadelphia, as you know, has like had a real hospital. So Pennsylvania Hospital, there are a number of things which are pretty unique about it. One, the Quakers who founded it were very concerned about the indigent and the insane wandering the streets of Philadelphia. Can't imagine that. But anyway, so Pennsylvania Hospital, Stacy Peoples, who's the archivist there, is just brilliant. If you ever have a chance to have her talk, she's amazing. But this hospital has a dry moat. You can't see it now because there are plantings in front of it, but it's there. It's 7 feet deep. It goes around the perimeter. And it was so that the mental patients could safely be exercised without escaping or getting hurt or wandering around. And they would normally exercise the patients on a Sunday. Well, it became a rather popular activity to go stand at the gates of the hospital and watch the crazy people in the moat. And when they realized that had become a big deal on Sundays, the hospital began to charge to view. So that money hopefully did go back into the hospital and the patients. Now, all these guys who were getting wounded all over the place in the East are starting to come into Philadelphia by train. So this is Broad and Washington. Washington was then known as Prime. So it would be Broad and Prime. So here was the train station. And when you got to the train station, there would be volunteers there who would take you to the Citizens Volunteer Hospital. If you've been at Broad and Washington, there's a gigantic new apartment complex, 1001 going up. That's where this was. So one of the train sheds. Thanks. Okay. Anyway, it was a very serious organization. It opened in 1862 and it served almost to the end of the war. So they would take the new patients to Citizens Volunteer Hospital to get them stabilized. And then when they were well enough to travel, you would take them to a bigger hospital. I love this. Some of these graphics are just incredibly beautiful. So I just had to show you. Now, oh, did I miss this? All right. I'm sorry. Okay. One of the most significant specialty hospitals that appeared was Turner's Lane Hospital. This is where the birth of neurology occurred. The three doctors who founded this hospital got permission, which really came down from Lincoln through the ranks, to because there were so many amputees that they were having the same kind of injuries and reactions, phantom limb. And so they got permission to group these patients. Did I mess that up? Oh, personally? Sorry. And anyway, they isolated the nerve patients. It was known as a nerve hospital, and did all kinds of experiments because they had never seen this number of injuries or symptoms of this kind. They used electricity to massage muscles, they did all kinds of experiments. And so Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, the official father of modern medical neurology and an incredible Renaissance man, he was really at the head of the pack here. And he wrote lots of novels and poetry. His son, John Mitchell, picked up where his father had left off at retirement and carried on that work. So now this is one of my favorite doctors, Dr. William Williams Keene, Philadelphia guy. And he was 23 years old when he began to serve in the Union Army as a doctor. He had had just over a year of medical training at that time, which was a very common case. And so he was 23, serving in the Civil War, and he served again in uniform at age 80 in World War I. If you ever get a chance to read his stuff, he just had such a grim sense of gallows humor, brilliant and funny and just an amazing human. And then Dr. George Reed Morehouse was the third partner. So Dr. Morehouse and Dr. Keene were both members of the Union League, which was actually in a different location than it is today. But they wrote a book about their experiments and recommendations and stuff. And I just love this. This book that they wrote published in 1864 is still in print and available through Walmart and Amazon. So I think that says a lot about a lasting impact. So they had to, I mean, they extemporized all these various buildings, but they really had to build some new hospitals to handle these huge numbers of patients. Now, the two large military hospitals in Philadelphia each had more than 3,500 beds. And interestingly, both North and South, the surgeons general decided on the same plans, which had been used successfully for a while in England and France, called pavilion hospitals. So they built these huge pavilion hospitals, which were long, narrow wooden buildings that were well ventilated, and they could move supplies and personnel through them much faster than trying to drag them through the post office building in, Washington, D.C. or somebody's barn. So these were very efficient facilities. And this is Satterlee. This is Clark Park where this was. And there is a memorial in Clark Park to Satterlee General Hospital. And the other one was in Chestnut Hill. That's Maurer Hospital. So the Pavilion Hospital, this is bordered on Stanton Avenue. This is on 27 acres, Maurer. But when you see the pictures of the Pavilion hospitals, they're beautifully laid out in geometric patterns. Like some of them are in a semicircle, some are like full ovals like this one. But Maurer, it was huge, and it served throughout the war. I believe that 50,000 patients were treated in the course of the war there. There's a marker up there, one of the lollipop signs. And another book still in print, the Rules and Special Orders for Maurer Hospital, which includes the admonition, spitting on the floor will not be tolerated. So, now, if you were kind of remanded to Maurer Hospital, if they got you stabilized at Citizens Volunteer Hospital, and then they thought, okay, now you need to go to a big general hospital. So they would take you to this other railway, the Philadelphia, Germantown, and Norristown Railroad at Green and 9th Streets. And this train went to Wyncote Station, which is still extant. And I think it's in its third iteration of the building, but that would be how you got to Maurer Hospital. Well, with all this expenditure for new hospitals and more personnel, they had to raise more money. And one of the things that was extremely popular to raise large amounts of money, millions, literally millions in Civil War dollars. This is the Great Sanitary Fair in Philadelphia. This is Logan Circle. So we're looking at this. I think this is kind of, if you were like on the second floor of the Central Library on the far west side. Now that's the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul in the back. So we're kind of looking out over Logan Circle that way. So these events these were giant expos, extremely sophisticated, and they usually ran for 10 days to 2 weeks. So Philadelphia had this one where President Lincoln came to see it, and the Philadelphians were very smug about that. But New York City did one. There was one on Long Island, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Boston. Major cities did these sanitary fairs. So they would include musical performances, dramas. This has been colorized, but it is an original Civil War photograph, art exhibits, auctions, livestock, all these events. It was, so the one in Philadelphia raised over $1 million in the 2 weeks that it was open here. And it, you can see like the kind of effort that went into building these things. It was really something pretty special. This is more of these original photographs from it. And this, again, the sanitary fair materials came from Library Company of Philadelphia, my heart. I love, they were just a spectacular resource. So they would have different restaurants, and this is the catalog for all the exhibits. But also, most of the big sanitary fairs published a daily newspaper about what was going on, what the auction was, what time the musical performances. It was a super big deal, and it just raised an incredible amount of money Chicago did a big one too. Well, the women who were not going to war peopled a lot of these enterprises. But just to talk a little bit more about them, like American women at this time were considered to be examples of domestic sentimentality. You were supposed to be prim, modest, obedient, following behind the men quietly, and weak and dependent. Well, when all the men were gone to the war, the women weren't having it. And a lot of American women who probably had never traveled more than a mile or two from their homes began to do very independent, dangerous, unheard of things, like get on trains. A group of women, Shiloh was one of the big battles in the South, and a group of 40 Southern women who really were protected, they were going to help. And they gathered together with a chaperone. The 40 of them got on a train and they went to Shiloh to volunteer to help in the hospitals. And the first hospital that they came to, the doctor who was the director of the hospital came out and refused them entrance. He said, "No more women or flies will be admitted." And these 40 brave souls moved on to the next hospital in Tennessee and, found they were going to help. It was just such a hideous, hideous situation. Well, nursing was not regarded as any kind of an okay job for women. The only really reasonable job you could get as a woman was teaching. But women did not handle the bodies of people outside their immediate family. If you were nursing a husband or a brother or somebody at home, that was one thing. But you did not take it on as a career to nurse people to whom you were not intimately related. Well, Philadelphia was kind of a tough thing at the time. There was very strong anti-Catholic sentiment in America. And in the earlier part of the 19th century, there was some hideous stuff going on. And there were Catholic nuns who were afraid to go out on the street in their habits. They were harassed, sometimes attacked. It was a very iffy situation for Catholics. And in 1844, the Know Nothing riots, the nativists, as they're known, were an anti-immigration group, and they did not want more Catholics in the country. Can't imagine that kind of discrimination, right? We wouldn't know anything about that, but amazing what endures. But the nativists started burning churches, and this is St. Michael's in Kensington, which fortunately, is repaired and still standing. They tried to burn St. Michael's in 1844. They went to St. Augustine's and pulled the books out of the library and made a bonfire in the street. Mobs went to Old St. Joseph's and St. Mary's, but the Quakers came out of Willings Alley and were able to talk the mobs down so they didn't burn those churches. But it was serious stuff. Well, there were no skilled nurses in America. Now, in England, it was a different story because Florence Nightingale, who grew up in a wealthy family, and she had been given an incredible education. And she was a strong-minded, independent individual too. And she had a lot of ideas about public health. And she went to Germany to study with people there. In Europe, the religious, the nuns and monks, because there really were not public health programs, they were the people who took care of the indigent and the dying. It was really a function of the religious. So the nuns who were in America, there were a good handful of people who had worked with Florence Nightingale in the 1850s and learned a lot of her ideas about meals and medication being given on a schedule, lots of ventilation in the places where the patients were. So the nuns couldn't stand the devastation of the country's men, and they began braving going out, and they started to appear unbidden to the hospitals and the battlefields. And President Lincoln put out a call requesting, there were about 12 orders of Catholic sisters in the country at the time. And he appealed, among others, to the Daughters of Charity house in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And so it is estimated, we don't have exact numbers, but it's estimated that between 700 and 800 nuns, about 20% of all the nuns in the country, served as nurses in the Civil War. Well, one of the big surprises was that they loved the nuns. The nuns, like, they would treat patients who had known communicable diseases. They would work long, crazy hours. They asked for very little for themselves. They were just remarkably devoted. And what happened was kind of an interesting thing in that, and it's reflected in some of the graphic art of the time. This is something you never would have seen 3 years before. This is from Frank Leslie's Illustrated or Harper's Weekly. And in the lower left, you see Catholic nuns depicted as angelic healers. You would never have seen that a few years before, but they won over the soldiers, they won over the doctors, and the United States government honored them, not until 1924, but still. This is the Nuns of the Battlefield Monument in Washington, D.C. It is a great big thing. It's four-sided. And I just want to read you the inscription. This was through an act of Congress that this came about, and it was the Irish artist Jerome Connor created it. He said, this is the inscription: "They comforted the dying, nursed the wounded, carried hope to the imprisoned, gave in his name a drink of water to the thirsty. To the memory and in honor of the various orders of sisters who gave their services as nurses on battlefields and in hospitals during the Civil War." So, it's a place you can go and visit. Well, another very important thing comes out of Philadelphia during the Civil War, which is microscopes. Now, microscopes had been around for many years, but the Army did not own any. Harvard University did not own any. If you went to war as a doctor and you really felt you needed a microscope, well, it was BYOM. Like, they just were not supplied. So there was a German immigrant, Joseph Zentmeyer. Now I have found he moved, I think he moved his shop 3 times. I don't think that they were operating consecutively, but he was on South 4th Street, South 8th Street, and South 11th Street. I found 3 different addresses. I was afraid to go further down that rabbit hole because I had actual other work to do, but it's an interesting thing. Anyway, he was highly skilled. This is Joseph Sentmeyer, and he manufactured microscopes. So he actually, when the Army realized, oh, we could use some of those, he came up with a particular model, which he called the Army Hospital model, which was supplied to the Union Army. I mean, anybody could buy one, but this was developed specifically for the Army. And oh, here's his 11th Street business card. Uh, Now, it's a pretty sophisticated piece of equipment, obviously, like, heavy duty machine work there. Well, it was very highly regarded. And several years later, in 1875, Joseph Zentmeyer was awarded the Elliott Cresson Medal of the Franklin Institute. Elliott Cresson was a philanthropist who was a life member of the Franklin Institute, and he created this award. Sometimes it's called the Golden Medal. It would be given kind of, in a way like the Nobel Prize is given. So this would be given for engineering, for different areas of scientific advancement. And it's now in 1998, they put all the Cresson medals under, I think it's now called the Benjamin Franklin Award or the Benjamin Franklin Medal. But that was the genesis of that award. And it was given, this is the quote, the description of why: for some discovery in the arts and sciences, or for the invention or improvement of some useful machine, or for some new process or combination of materials in manufactures, or for ingenuity, skill, or perfection in workmanship. So, oh, sorry, went a little fast there. Well, this was all very appealing to another gentleman, a graduate of Central High School, Dr. Joseph Janvier Woodward. He was an American soldier, American surgeon, and international pioneer in the field of photomicrography. And he was in charge eventually of assembling the Army Medical Museum. He was a past president of the American Medical Association. And he really was a total pioneer in this field. I believe this is one of Woodward's original sketches of how he set it up. And this is the kind of device that he was using. Well, we talked in the beginning about the sculpture that really holds this time and these people in our consciousness present. And so those are all the monuments and statues that have been here for a long time. And I thought it would be nice to see a couple more in our future of important ones. And we were lent this beautiful statue of Harriet Tubman, Journey to Freedom, by Wesley Wofford. Now, Harriet Tubman is known as she was a scout and a spy. She shepherded untold numbers of people into freedom. She was highly influential in that, but she was also a nurse. She was a very gifted nurse, and she had learned a great deal about herbal medicine. So she really served as a nurse largely as well during the Civil War. And when the war ended, she was appointed as matron of a hospital for Black soldiers in Virginia. So we're hopefully getting our own Harriet Tubman statue. I think this is so beautiful, by Alvin Pettit. This is actually a photograph. He's done the model, the miniature. I don't know exactly when we're supposed to get it, but it would be lovely to have that here. And she's depicted as a Civil War scout and soldier. This is called A Higher Power, the Call of a Freedom Fighter. And it's, yeah, I just Googled like last week to see if we had a date on when this might be, but I was not able to find it. Well, I want to leave you with thoughts from two major players in Civil War medicine. And one is Harriet Tubman. This is something that she said that really, it moves me every time I read it. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. The other quote that I thought about President Lincoln and what a remarkable person he was. And while he was not officially allied with a particular Christian sect, he was kind of unicorn Christian, but he believed very strongly. I recently read some of his letters. He believed that God put him on earth to end slavery. And he did so many things so many of the things, the advances in medicine were made possible because he okayed them. And I thought, what would President Lincoln say to us today, to Americans, to us, to me, to you? What might he say? And I thought it might be this: the ballot is stronger than the bullet. Oh. Well, thank you so much. You're an awesome audience. Thank you. Okay, Pam.
Yeah. What I was going to say earlier was, if you go down to the Fresh Grocer at Broad and Washington now, that is housed in the last
Sprouts?
Sprouts, yes. That is housed in the last remnant of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore train shed. That is in the original train shed.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And also that there was a railroad that ran from the Navy Yard down the Delaware River up to the Baltimore, Wilmington, and Philadelphia Railroad. And there were a couple of refreshment saloons and hospitals at the base of Washington, which was then Prime Street, where they received soldiers first in the beginning of the war coming down from the north, being ferried across the river, and then later on in the war coming up from the south as casualties.
Wow. I did not know that. You know where I'm going to be next week. Checking that out. Wait, say that again? That's right. The refreshment saloons.
There's a book, the title eludes me, but we can be in touch and I will share with you. There's a woman who wrote a book based on the Cooper Refreshment Saloon and the Union Volunteer Refreshment Saloon. Down the Cooper Refreshment Saloon was right next to Old Swedes Church under the I-95 overpass right now.
Oh. You are loaded with good stuff.
Questions?
I'm very happy you mentioned Mauer, because I lived on Mauer Street in Mount Airy for 37 years and learned about him after we moved in, Mauer. So I'm glad you mentioned them.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty important when you think about the size of those hospitals. Yeah. Wow. Well, Chimborazo had 8,000 beds in Virginia.
First of all, thank you. It's great.
Oh, my pleasure.
What I wanted to ask was there essentially like a recruitment drive to get surgeons that were not in the military, the status of a military surgeon?
There were broadsides. Well, when the war started, there were, I may be off by a couple, but I think there were 127 doctors in the Union Army, and 20, some of them retreated to the South whence they came. But by the end of the war, there were more than 12,000. And most of whom like did not come in because they were like polished, accomplished doctors. They like the ones that I mentioned who were medical students, that was a huge bulk of them. And then they created medical cadets who were students. I mean, these guys were 17, 18, 19. And the cadets, they were a rather rollicking group, actually. But they were very upbeat and they wrote songs and stuff. But they watched, because they did these same surgeries over and over, and they saw them happen. And I guess if you saw 20 amputations, you were like, I could do that. So, and they did. You know, these kids, when they were shorthanded, jumped in and did it. And I haven't read about any lawsuits. So, but yeah, they did. They recruited like crazy. The Interestingly, there were only 13 African American doctors who served officially. And a lot of the time I talk, because some of these are really my favorites. Alexander Thomas Augusta, who started out in Virginia, had to get his medical education, as many of them did, in Canada, because American medical schools would not admit them owing to the color of their skin. At Canada, I didn't realize Toronto was very welcoming. And Dr. Augusta, he and his wife moved there. He went to medical school, which was a 6-year affair at the time. And when he graduated, the dean called him brilliant, and he went into private practice. But then he got recruited to head the City Hospital of Toronto. So, you know, he was no slacker. And he volunteered to come back when the war started. He wrote to Lincoln and offered his services as a doctor for the African American troops. And the hassle they gave this man for months. Yes, come, no, don't. No, well, yeah, maybe. And finally he came. And sometimes I do a lecture about the things that occurred because of the medical personnel. And Alexander Thomas Augusta was a prime example to me of that. He finally began serving in 1862. He and his wife moved back. They moved back to Washington, and he was in Union Army uniform, and it was raining hard, and he was on a streetcar in downtown DC. And he was trying to stay inside the car and out of the rain. And the white passengers in the car were trying to push him out onto the platform or off the streetcar entirely. And he was enraged. I mean, you can imagine. And he wrote another letter to Lincoln asking for protection of African American families on public transportation in the city of Washington, D.C. And it went to a Massachusetts senator, a Republican, who was equally like, and he took it to Congress. And by 1865, they passed a law in Washington allowing no racial discrimination on public transportation in that city. Took a while to kind of, spread, but yeah, but 13 of those Black doctors, most of whom were educated in Canada or England, served those troops. And that's the first time that we get Blacks and women in the medical field, places they were never allowed, let alone welcomed. So it really, I always say, it shifted the tectonic plates of the culture. Absolutely. And women and flies began to be admitted.
Another question? Okay, maybe 2 more.
I don't have a question, but I was at the Mutter Museum, and they have a whole history of Black medical hospitals and services and such. seemed to be associated with the Mercy nuns.
Yes,
And the Mercy.
Sisters of Mercy.
Yeah, the health system there. But there were, I believe they did staff a lot of hospitals who treated Black patients. But I was very fascinated by that whole history of the hospitals and the treatment and such that the Mutter has a really excellent presentation of.
I was on the advisory panel for that exhibit, and my good friend, Dr. Robert Hicks, was the executive director at the Mutter. And in fact, he has a new book, and I gave Pam's contact information because I said, this might be a group that would really like to hear from you. But you're right. At 6th and Washington was the site of one of the hospitals for African-American soldiers. I don't think it has one of those lollipop signs, though. Yeah.
So you'd mentioned that in the US, medical school was 2 years, and it was basically like a repeat. The second year was basically a repeat of the first. And that like in Canada and in Europe, it was longer.
4.
Okay. What was that entailing? Would that have been more classwork? Would that have been more hands-on stuff?
It seems to me that it was, because dissection was actually illegal in the United States. So medical students got a very bad rap as, what did they call it? Grave robbers. Yes. Because they weren't allowed to cut up bodies, or look, or how are they going to learn? And so they were accused of exhuming, bodies from potter's fields and stuff. But it does seem that the Europeans were much more hands-on, and none of these medical schools at the time had a hospital attached to them. So,
Attendance of patients mandatory as part of the education. Started at Jefferson with Thomas Dent Mutter.
I think University of Pennsylvania Medical School was earlier than that.
Okay, you might be right. You might be right.
They had it had been an almshouse infirmary that they were attached to. I think that it had 6 beds.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
because Jefferson is later. Jefferson is 19th century, really.
Yeah.
And Penn is central.
Also, 2 union.
What- I missed that.
Mhm.
Take it back.
The answer is yes. I was saying yes. The almshouse connected to Penn, that was circa 1760, but a block south, down by the corner of Spruce, Pine, 8th and 9th.
I believe you are right on. Yeah. Mhm.
One of the things I found out in my studies too was that 2 of the founding faculty of Jefferson had sons who went on to become Union Civil War generals. George McClellan Sr., whose son George McClellan Jr., one of your favorite statues, and also Charles Meigs, who the father of American obstetrics, and his son was Montgomery Meigs, Quartermaster General of the Union Army, who made Mrs. Lee's Rose Garden into a cemetery at Arlington.
I forgot about that. You're right. Wow. Oh.
All right, let's give a nice warm thank you, Carole Adrienne.
Thank you.
We're going to do a presentation.
Sure.
So you're welcome to speak, and people might want to chat.
Okay.
You're okay.
Thank you.
But I'm just going to ask you, anyway, you can stay there. Move the camera though.
Yeah. Okay, so we have some newly certified members. Let me turn this off.
And we want to duly congratulate them and award them their pins and their certificates. I know. I should have had Todd bring his drums. So our first one, we have a few who are not here tonight, but first we have Brian Haugwat. Is that how you say it? Look him up. How do you say it? Howitt. Oh, really? A lot of letters for Howitt.
Yes. It's anglicized, but it's anglicized in the 1660s. So they had all the extra letters.
His
back
name
then.
is anglicized, has lots of extra letters.
But it was anglicized
Go
in the
sit down.
1660s.
Thank you. Our next awardee is Daniel Hensel. Woo, woo. You see them? Next is, are you still here? Good. I know she was going to have to leave early. Laurel McLaughlin. Woo, 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 woo. So nice to see younger members too. Oh, yeah. So she's asking if we have various areas of expertise. Yeah, we're all kinds of tour guides. That's the short answer. Okay. Mostly history, but there are other kinds of tour guides as well. Next, we have James Mundy. Congratulations. Next, we have Nicole Roper. And I don't think Tom Swift is not here, is he? No. So our other newly certified guides who are not here tonight are John Donato. So yay. Tom Swift. Yay. Martin Lotito. Yay. And Tom Rosenberg. Cool. So we have, let me do a few announcements and then we're going to see if we can get Antoinette up to do a quick little couple slides. Maybe you want to get that ready while I finish with the announcements. We started our 2025 renewals. So if you have not renewed yet, which is most of you here, because not many have renewed yet. And if you're new, we would love to have you join us. So if you enjoyed tonight, you could become a member. We have an early bird special through December 31st. So it's a little bit cheaper through December 31st. So do that before just the end of December. Sign up for the NFTGA conference by October 31st to get the early bird discount. Do you want to say a few words, Judy? Just sign up. Cool. The people all over the country, 7 from Philly already, but we have a subsidy. So we have $2,500 that we're going to split among all of the people who register from Philly. So we don't know how much that will be until we find out how many people register, but the deadline is October 31st. So if you're not a member and you want to go to this national tour guide conference, join as a member, sign up for the conference, and then you get the subsidy. We want to give a big shout out and thank you to Carpenter's Hall. We did an informal memorial for Josh Silver yesterday. It was really nice and they donated the space for us. So we really want to thank Carpenter's Hall for that. Yes, woo woo. The formal memorial for Josh, the official one that his brothers are doing, will be October 27th at Strawberry Mansion. So look on the website and the newsletter for that info. I think it's 4 p.m. on the 27th. Vote for your t-shirt choice. It was in the newsletter this week. It'll be in the next couple of newsletters. We had a contest to design a semi-quincentennial t-shirt. So I think there's 13 or 14 designs. So go in and vote for your top 3 by October 20th. So because we need to get moving on this if we want to have them ready. So events coming up, October 14th, coffee break. I think Jim Murphy's not going to be here then, but everyone's still gathering and they meet at the visitor center in the morning. October 23rd, Historic Society of Pennsylvania. Vince is organizing that. Not a lot of signups yet. Really great opportunity to go behind the scenes at the Historical Society. They're going to show us some of their cool documents and things. And it's free. We're setting up, these things are still tentative, but we're hoping to do a visit to the Atwater Kent exhibition at B.F.A. We're hoping to do that November 8th. Is it really good? Yeah, everyone said it's been really good. So we'll hopefully they'll do a curatorial tour for us and talk a little about the collection, its fate, what's going to happen to it. So we'll do that hopefully on the 8th. For our November meeting, we have a representative from the, I always forget how to say it, Convention Visitor Bureau, I think is how you say it. But they're going to come talk about all the big events coming up in 2026. So the World Cup, Major League Baseball game, all of these things. So she's going to talk about that in November because November is training month. So save the dates, November 16, 17, and 18. That is a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday because it's easier to get a bus on a Monday. And we're going to do step-on bus training. So if you do bus training, if you do step-on bus tours and you want, a little more training and kind of network with other guides, or if you've never done it, you want some training, but we've never had a training for step-on buses. So we're really excited about it. I'm working to get money for these buses are expensive. So we're hoping it's not going to be astronomically high to attend the training. So getting sponsors. Yeah, I've been doing step-on buses and I really want more training. So it's kind of trial by fire when you do it. So we're hoping to get a little more, training in for people. 16, 17, and 18 of November. So it's a Saturday, Sunday, Monday. All 3 days will be different aspects of bus training. Yeah. So if you can only do 1 day or 2 days, you could do that. You'll still get something out of it. The other things we're going to have that month that are still in the works is an interpretation workshop with the Park Service. So talking about how to structure a talk at a site based on the training they do for their rangers. And then also we have this man from Spain who's going to come on at 11 a.m. our time, so that's not too late in Spain, but he's going to talk about Spain's and the Hispanic contribution to the Revolutionary War. So we hear a lot about France. We just had Lafayette here. So now we're going to hear about Spain. Although as Graham likes to say, the Spanish always think it's all about them. And I think the Spain says the French always think it's all about them. So we'll hear the other side. And we're setting up a Christmas visit to the Ebenezer Maxwell Mansion, Victorian Christmas. So those are sort of still in the works.